Hello everyone and welcome to By Black and Bookish, a YouTube channel where a bi black girl who reads too much is eagerly looking forward to the day where she can catch Santa Claus and murder him so I can become Santa Claus. Because I'm planning to post this on Christmas, I figured it would be appropriate to read a Christmas themed book, and I just so happen to have do a collection book called That Christmas Feeling that has two Christmas themed romance novels in it. And I remember I got this book I think when I was in fifth grade. It was during Christmas. We were traveling somewhere with I think the church that we were in at the time. And so we stopped by at a winter bookstore and I was allowed to get a book to read while we were in the car, and I decided to get this book without realizing that it was an adult romance novels. Not adult as in there's like sex scenes in it, but as in it features adults and they talk about adult like things. Like I think one of them had the main guy in the second one, which is the one we're gonna read, he's like a widow and he's dealing with all that. And one of them, the lady in the first one, she has to take care of her elderly aunt who's like has a hoarding problem. So not themes that a 10-year-old would really particularly understand, but I did really like the romance novels. I thought the romances were very cute. And so I ended up reading this book probably every year until I graduated high school. Another fun fact about these novels that I don't think I mentioned yet is that these are Christian romance novels, which is the reason why there's no sex scenes in them. So these books are published by Steeple Hill. They make a whole bunch of other Christian romance novels. Back in middle school, me and my best friend used to read them a lot because her mom had a huge like pile of them, of the paperback ones, and we would just read them, swap them, and blah 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 until my mom confiscated these books from me because she was like, they're too adult and you're not allowed to read them. So naturally I became an agnostic heathen. So really this is her fault and not my own. So I will be reading the first 3 chapters of the second book because that one's my favorite. The second book is about this romance between this woman. I think her name is like Pam or something. No, the guy's name's Paul, and he is a single dad of twins, and he hires a nanny named Rose, and together they slowly fall in love. There's a moment of this true meaning of Christmas or whatever, and finding God. Who the fuck cares? So yeah, with that being said, let's get into it. So the second book in this collection is called Christmas Moon by Gail Gaymer Martin, and here in the dedication she dedicates to her husband, which is actually kind of cute, and of course to the Lord. I think all of these books, Steeple Hill books that I read back in the day, all of them have like a part of dedication is for God. Chapter 1. Rose, I want you to marry me. Rose Danby's spoon clanged into the sink as she spun around to face her employer. She searched his face, expecting to see a grin, but he looked serious. He was handling the joke with the skill of a stand-up comedian. So, what's the punchline? Rose asked. Paul Stewart faltered. It's not a joke. I was thinking that. It's not a joke? She felt her forehead rumple like a washboard. Not that she wouldn't want to marry a man as kind and handsome as her employer, but she was his twin's nanny. What do you mean it's not a joke? His gaze searched hers. I'm sorry, I shocked you. He moved closer. It just makes sense. It makes sense to you, maybe, but I don't get it. He glanced over his shoulder before refocusing on her. Are the twins sleeping? She nodded. They went to bed about an hour ago. A relieved look settled on his face and he pulled out a kitchen chair. Could we sit and talk? Talk? She felt her legs tremble and realized sitting was a wise move. Before she took a step, the tea kettle whistled. How about a cup of tea while we talk? Without waiting for an answer, she moved to the stove and pulled the water from the burner. Talk? What more could he say after his I want you to marry me line? Rose made the tea with as much speed as her shaking hands could manage, then set a mug in front of him and sat across from him with her own. What's this about? He raised his focus from the cup to her face. I've been asked to take a transfer. Toad is more accurate. Transfer? Her world spun out of control. What would she do? She had taken this position more than a year ago after a romantic fiasco. She wasn't ready to find another job. You mean transferred out of LA? He nodded, then refocused on the tea. Transferred to where? Minnesota. She felt her breath escape. Minnesota? He inched his gaze upward to Little Cloud. But why? I don't understand. One of our branches is having serious problems. They'll give me 2 years to troubleshoot or close the place. He rubbed the back of his neck, then shook his head slowly. That's why I need you. The kids need you. The kids. What would life be like without his 4-year-old twins? Ice edged through her veins. Though she had a huge challenge with Paul's daughter, Kayla, Rose loved the children. Kayla had been born a quiet child, and her brother, Colin, had taken over for her. She mainly communicated through Colin and occasionally her father, but Rose had finally made progress. What would happen if they moved away? Kayla needed her. They both did, and she needed them. But her thoughts were a jumble, but one thing was clear. I can't marry you, Paul. Though she spoke the words, the vision of being in Paul's arms rose in her mind. She had dreamed it before, then scolded herself for being so foolish. She was the nanny, the dinner maker. Even the thought of another employer-employee romance made her recoil. His brown eyes sparkled with concern. But I can't go without you, Rose. I can't find someone to care for my kids and handle a floundering corporation without help. You didn't ask me to help. You asked me to marry you. That's different. A deep sigh escaped her. She longed to say yes, but she was a Christian, a woman who knew love and commitment were what the Lord expected for marriage. She shook her head. I can't leave Los Angeles, and I can't marry someone who doesn't love me. Old memories tore through her and left her reeling. I thought you loved the kids. You didn't ask me to marry the kids. I love them with all my heart. The thought of losing them kills me. Tears rolled from her eyes. He knelt beside her. Don't cry, please. I made a terrible mistake asking you to marry me. I know you're a Christian woman, and I thought marriage would be the only way you'd agree to come with us. Angry at her uncontrolled emotion, she grabbed a napkin from the holder and daubed her eyes. You're an executive. You're strong and persuasive. Tell them you can't drag your kids that far away. They'll have to listen to you. And if they don't? He rose and rested his hand on the back of her chair. She lifted her eyes to his stress-filled face, trying to contain the ache in her heart. They'll listen, Paul. They have to. Chapter 2. Rose, I want you to marry me. The words still echoed in Rose's ears 2 months later as she looked out the patio window of the lovely Victorian house that Paul had rented in Little Cloud. The setting was perfect for the twins. Large yard, woods, creek, freedom. She watched them playing in the leaves, still amazed that in October trees had already turned colors. Since arriving, she reviewed why she had finally agreed to come, but the answer was easy. The separation from the children had been dreadful, At night, she would look at the moon and tell herself the same moon was hanging over Little Cloud, Minnesota. I'm pretty sure that's ripping off of that Steven Spielberg slash Don Bluth animated movie, the one with the mice, the one where somewhere out there the song came from. An American Tale. That's a ripoff of American Tale. I know it. But the thought hadn't given her comfort as much as it had accentuated her isolation. The children had become her life. After 3 weeks of Paul's pleading, she had agreed to relocate, and her fantasies had grown, with herself as mistress of a lovely home in Little Cloud. Paul coming home to dinner and telling her about his difficult day. Then reality had set in. Things hadn't changed at all. As always, when Paul arrived home, she'd returned to her quiet apartment. He had kept his promise, their deal, he called it. Not only was the apartment waiting when she arrived, but he'd bought her a new car. Rose pulled her thoughts back to her task. She unloaded another carton of kitchen equipment and piled the empty box along with the others. She discovered the boxes in the back entry waiting to be unpacked. Time was fleeting, and Paul was late again. Even if he ate warmed over meals, she had to feed the children. Rose set the boxes aside while she checked the casserole in the oven, then called the children inside. They scampered through the doorway with leaves clinging to their clothes, dried grass on their shoes. "Don't move," she said. Colin stopped and then halted Kayla by the patio door. "Look at your shoes," she said, heading for the broom. When she returned, Colin giggled. You know what this reminds me of? There, or I guess more accurately, what something else reminded me of this book. There was so back in the day when I was into Teen Wolf, the MTV show, my main number one ship was Scott and Styles because I thought they worked very well. I wasn't a huge fan of what was the ship that everyone shipped? Derek, and I think it was called, and I think his name was Derek or something like that. In Styles, I didn't really like that ship that much. It didn't make sense to me. They bickered once or twice, but that doesn't mean they're in love. What's love is the way that Scott and Styles will constantly sacrifice themselves for the other. Now that's love. What they had was just, hey, I don't really like my friend's friend that much. But there was one fan fiction that I did read of them, and it was about Derek, who was like a businessman. It was exactly like this. He was a businessman. He had twins, and then Styles was hired as a nanny. He wasn't a Christian woman, but everything else is the same. And also, one of the kids also had kind of like a gender crisis and wanted to express themselves as, I believe, more, I think they were transitioning from male to female. So the kid wanted to express themselves a little bit more masculine. And yeah, it was a pretty good fan fiction. It was pretty well written from what I remember. But that's exactly what this reminds me of, which is a little funny. Shoes off and shake your jackets outside before you go upstairs, or I'll use this broom to shoo you back outside. Colin dodged her teasing, and even Kayla grinned as they slipped off their things and darted up the stairs. Rose chuckled at her ploy. She used the broom as an idle threat. The twins would laugh when she grasped it and gave them a warning, but she learned they would usually do as she asked. She sucked up the debris and put away the broom. Then, remembering Kayla's tangled hair, Rose headed for the staircase. "Kayla, please, bring down your brush." If Kayla didn't respond, she prayed Colin would bring it. In minutes, the children's footsteps reverberated on the stairs, and Colin arrived with Kayla's hairbrush. "Thank you," Rose said, giving him a quick hug. "Kayla, please come here." Rose looked at the 4-year-old and waited. "Kayla, please." The girl didn't move. Rose's stomach twisted. Since their relocation, the child had reverted to her old self before Rose had become their nanny. "Colin, please talk to your sister." He repeated Rose's request, and without hesitation, Kayla crossed the room and sat beside Rose. She dragged the hairbrush across Kayla's long hair while the little girl sat statue-like. Rose wanted to take her in her arms and hug conversation out of her, but she tried that before and Kayla hadn't responded. The day Rose had arrived in Little Cloud, Kayla had clung to her like moss to a tree trunk, but when it came to speaking, Rose never knew what to expect. She wondered if the child feared she'd leave again. The thought broke Rose's heart. One day she would leave when Paul had no need for her anymore. A new panic jolted her. What did she have to go back to? She'd forsaken everything to make the move. As Rose continued brushing Kayla's hair, Static lifted the strands like magic fingers. "Look, Colin, she looks like a long-haired porcupine." "I do not," Kayla said. Rose heard curiosity in her voice. "Yes, you do. Colin's right." Praying it would work, Rose lifted the hair mirror in front of Kayla. "See for yourself." Kayla giggled. "I do." The child's words thrilled Rose. "But you're a very pretty porcupine." Kayla looked at Rose, her smiling brown eyes so like her father's, and grinned. Rose put down the hairbrush while an unexpected concern filled her mind. Kayla had become preschool, and Rose prayed the other children weren't making fun of her, and the teacher hadn't lost her patience. If so, Kayla would slide back even further. Maybe that's what was happening to her now. The casserole's aroma filled the kitchen, and in moments the children and she was around the table, saying a blessing before they ate. Time ticked past, and Rose finally sent the children to bed without seeing Paul. The scenario broke her heart. The moon had risen high over the trees when Rose finally heard Paul's car pull into the drive. She stood and headed for the kitchen. He stopped through the doorway the same time she did. "You look terrible," she said, witnessing the stress on his face and the tired look in his eyes. He dropped his briefcase on a kitchen chair and gave a one-shoulder shrug. "I'm okay. The place is too laid back for a well-run corporation. I'm trying to get the hang of their politics before implementing changes." She moved to the refrigerator and brought out his dinner plate covered with plastic wrap. "How much longer will this go on?" He shook his head and sank into a chair. "I don't know. It's taking more time than I planned, but I hope it ends soon." "So do I." Rose slid the dish into the microwave and pressed the buttons. "I'm sorry, Rose. I know this cuts into your time." Her time? Rose's life revolved around this family. She had no life of her own. She wondered if he really understood. "It's not me I'm thinking of, Paul. It's the kids. They miss you." "I know they do, and I miss them." Rose looked at his expression and wished she'd kept quiet. Chapter 3. Paul's head dropped, and Rose turned away, her heart aching for him. He wanted to be a good father, she knew. When the buzzer sounded, she pulled a salad from the refrigerator and set the plate in front of him. "Would you like some coffee?" "Sure," he said, "if you don't mind." While she filled the coffee maker, her mind whirled into memories. She recalled the day she had arrived in Little Cloud. Paul had surprised her at the airport. She'd envisioned him dressed in a dark suit with a conservative tie and his hair immaculately combed as usual. Instead, he'd worn jeans and a t-shirt beneath a plaid flannel jacket open at the front. His hair seemed longer and shaggier. He'd looked as handsome and burly as a Minnesota lumberjack. She'd faltered before gaining control over her emotions. At that moment, she had known she was in trouble. Rose, hearing the single word, her name, stirred her senses, and she swung around, sprinkling coffee grounds on the clean floor. Paul noticed and smiled. Sit with me while I eat. She worked like a robot, cleaning up the spill, then settled into a chair across from him. Paul drew the napkin across his face. How were the twins today? Something good happened. Kayla spoke to me. His face brightened. What brought that on? She told him about Kayla's hair static. I'm thinking I need to do something special with her. Colin spends his afternoons outside searching for all kinds of horrible bugs while Kayla wants to play. I need to find ways to show her more attention. She'll eat that up. I hope so. How's she doing in school? Paul asked. I haven't heard anything, but I plan to talk with the teacher next week and see if Kayla's communicating. Good, thanks. Paul glanced at his empty plate. I did a pretty good job. You did. You want that coffee now? His chair scraped on the tile as he pushed it back. Sure. Then we can sit in the living room and talk. Her pulse jumped at his words. Talk. Paul gave a tired grin. Just talk. I need a friend. He needed a friend. So did she. But any relationship beyond the boss-employee boundary sent chills down her back. You go ahead, she said, and I'll bring it in. Paul vanished through the doorway, and Rose stared at the empty space. She poured the coffee and carried it into the living room. Paul had lit a fire, and the warmth beckoned her. She handed him a cup, then settled nearby. Silence surrounded them, except for the snap of embers sending up a sprinkle of red and yellow sparks. She watched the glow, waiting for Paul to talk. The longer she waited, the more uncomfortable she felt. This wasn't the first time Paul had asked her to visit before she made the lonely 10-mile trek home. Sometimes she wondered if she'd made a mistake letting him persuade her to relocate. But she couldn't blame him solely. Her heart had made her decision. Why so quiet? Rose asked, wishing he'd say something. Thinking about the kids. I know I'm letting them down when they need me. You are. I'm not going to soften it. They wait all afternoon for you to come home, then go to bed missing you. She missed him too, if she were honest. I'll do better soon. Promise. Promise? She'd heard that before. She knew he had good intentions, but please, trust me. I'm trying to get the thing settled. Trust me. She'd heard that before too. They fell into silence again, and Rose relived the hurt and humiliation of nearly 2 years earlier when she had learned that her fiancé, her boss, was cheating on her. While she was chattering about her marriage plans and spitting out her hopes and dreams, the whole office staff knew about. The memory caught in her throat. She stopped shedding tears. Now she'd hardened herself. That day, she had returned Dawn's ring and walked away from her plush job. Never again. She'd trust the man once. She had garnered too much experience, too much doubt, and too much humiliation to make that mistake again. Sometimes I feel strange, sitting here with you. Strange? Why? He looked at her for the first time since she brought him his coffee. Many times you've asked me to sit after you get home late. We chat like old friends, and yet I'm your employee. Rose, please, he said, grasping the arm of the chair and leaning closer. You're more like a friend, not an employee. I have employees at the plant. Friends, employer, employee. She gazed at Paul's profile. He was good-looking and stable. She wanted to trust him. His light brown hair shimmered with highlights in the glow from the fire, but she let good looks sway her once, not again. Rose paused a minute. drawn by the gold and red leaves fluttering to the patio. The children's laughter drifted in from outside. They seemed to love the outdoors and had spent time after school playing hide and seek, then switching to tag as they tripped and tumbled onto the broad expanse of the lawn. When they bounded from the ground, the leaves attached to their clothing like colorful patchwork. Looking out, Rose smiled until she recalled Colin offering to show her a snake he'd found. She wanted no part of any creature that didn't walk on four legs or two. That included bugs and spiders. Rose looked at the clock, knowing she should be doing other things, but none of the options struck her fancy. The fresh air had a greater pull. She climbed the stairs, grabbed a sweatshirt, and tucked it over her blouse. Back in the kitchen, she stepped through the doorway to the covered patio. A pleasant breeze carried the scent of damp earth and dried foliage to her. A leaf rake leaned against the house as if calling to her, and she grasped it while the children beckoned her to join the fun. While the twins grabbed handfuls of dried leaves and tossed them her way, she raked them into a pile. Because of the noise the children were making, Rose didn't hear Paul arrive until she felt him shove a handful of leaves down her neck. "This is war," she called, gathering her own crispy weapons and charging toward him. Still dressed in his suit, he captured her hand and held it fast while his other one grasped her waist as if fending her off. She tried to wiggle free, but he kept them close. When their eyes met, something passed between them: awareness, concern, surprise. Before she could decide, he pulled away with a laugh. "Unfair," he said, dashing across the lawn. "Let me go change." In a flash, he was gone, and the children joined her, using their hands while she piled the leaves into a high mound. When Paul returned, dressed in jeans and a pullover, he brought along another leaf rake and a camera. They took a break to snap photos of the twins. Then Paul and Rose with the autumn colors as their background. Finally, they returned to work, but before Rose realized that Paul was plotting, he grabbed her rake and tossed her into the colorful heap. Leaves billowed around her, catching in her hair. They crackled as she shifted to rise, ready to make her own attack. But the children had already begun the job. With the twins against Paul's back, he tumbled forward and landed beside her with a thwack. The crisp pile crunched beneath Rose's elbow as she tried to move out of the way, but Paul turned his face so close the nearness unsettled her. Before she could escape, the children joined the battle with arms full of gold and orange. Playful, Paul became her protector, blocking the children's attack. As he shifted, their noses brushed in the chaos, making her heart flutter like a lone leaf clinging to an overhead bough. The twins jumped into the fray, and they became a tangle of arms and legs until she and Paul sorted them out. They clamored from the stirring mound, their cheerful voices ringing in her ears. For once, Rose knew why she'd come to Little Cloud. This was home. Paul stepped back and feasted on the sight of their leaf-strewn clothing. The children's smiles had never been brighter. His gaze shifted to Rose, her cheeks ruddy, her eyes glistening with their fun. His chest tightened. He managed to convince her to come to Little Cloud. He called it a deal, an arrangement, a contract, whatever. He had dragged Rose to Minnesota to make life easier for him. He'd given little thought to her needs, and now he asked her to be his friend. An unpleasant sensation rattled through him. Had he turned Rose's life upside down only to offer her a business deal? He studied Rose's slender frame. He loved her broad smile when the children made her laugh with their antics. She couldn't help but wonder why she'd never married and what had caused her to leave a good paying job and end up babysitting for his kids. She'd never told him, and he felt it too personal to ask, but then how was he to question anyone? Since Dela's death, he'd had to learn to live without a woman, but time had passed and he felt his mind and heart awakening to a need. His gaze shifted to the children. They deserved a mother. He grabbed the rake and dragged the thought away along with the leaves. Let's get this back into a pile and we can have a bonfire. He had to do something to stop the ache that had grown inside him. Rose excused herself and headed for the house, while Paul tugged at the leaves, drawing in the scent of autumn and a hint of winter's cold. When he'd made a high mound, he lit the leaves and watched the flame grow, crackling and spiraling smoke into the air. Despite his attempt to forget, his concern for Rose returned again. The children were a handful, yet the dearest kids on earth, but they were nonstop, and so was Rose's life. He had to give Rose a break. She put up with too many long, stressful days. He thought about his Aunt Inez, who'd been so helpful when he first arrived. He'd been blessed to have her so near. Asking her to help again seemed pushing his luck, but he had to do something until his work life calmed down. He would think of something special for Rose. Well, that's the first 3 chapters of Christmas Room from the collection That Christmas Feeling. Honestly, there's kind of like a joke about how like the Christian version of things are like really bad and cheesy, and it's partially true, but I think that works really well with romance novels. Honestly, all the Christian romance novels I read, at least the ones published by Steeple Hill, they've been pretty fucking good. I'm not gonna lie. Sure, it plays out like a Lifetime movie, like a really cheesy Lifetime movie, but sometimes that's all you need for romance novels. I'm not asking for something like groundbreaking. All I'm asking for is for, a boss and his nanny to fall in love during Christmas. That's some cute ass shit. And sometimes that's all you need. And they don't really hound the whole Christianity thing that often. It's just like every now and then they'll mention, oh, I can't do this because I'm a Christian woman. I'm like, fair enough, babe. You saved yourself for the Lord, and I respect that. But it's still very cute. I am nothing but respect to you, Gail Gaymer Martin, and also Catherine Palmer, who wrote the first one. The first one's also pretty cute, but like I said, I really do like that kind of like mixed family trope. And honestly, Christmas Moon is probably the reason for that. So that's it, guys. Hope to see you next time when I when I rank all the books I read this year. And with that being said, Merry Christmas. Bye.